The United States spent $44 billion to build the ultimate ghost. In the air, the B-2 Spirit is completely untouchable. It can bypass any radar system on Earth. But on the ground, it has a fatal $2 billion flaw. A weakness so embarrassing and so fragile that simply moving it out of the hangar too quickly can shatter its skin and cripple the entire fleet. This is not a story about military supremacy. It is an accounting nightmare. Imagine sitting in a classified Pentagon briefing room. The Cold War is at its absolute freezing point. On the table in front of you are the capability reports for America's strategic bomber fleet. First, you have the B-52 Stratofortress. It is a workhorse. It is a legend. It is also the size of a flying apartment building. On a Soviet radar screen, it lights up like a billboard. Then you have the B-1B Lancer. This was supposed to be the modern solution. The strategy was simple: fly low, fly fast, and hug the terrain to stay under the radar. But there was a problem. Soviet surface-to-air missile technology was advancing faster than American aeronautics. The generals in that room ran the combat simulations. The math was completely terrifying. If the order was given to penetrate deep into Soviet airspace, the B-52 and the B-1B would be flying into a meat grinder. They would not survive. The United States Air Force realized they didn't just need a new plane. They needed a new law of physics. They needed a strategic bomber that could bypass the most advanced defense networks on Earth, deliver a nuclear payload, and simply vanish. They wanted a ghost. Northrop Grumman stepped into that room and promised they could build it. But there was a catch: the price tag. When you factor in research, development, procurement, and the highly classified infrastructure needed to support it, the total program acquisition cost reached an absolute fever pitch: $44.75 billion. Let that number hang in the air for a second. $44.75 billion. To put that into human reality, that is enough capital to fund the construction of 11 One World Trade Centers, paid in cash, with $1 billion left over for office furniture. It was the ultimate blank check. For that mountain of taxpayer capital, you would expect an armada, a fleet so massive it would darken the skies over Eastern Europe. But that is not what the Pentagon got. They did not get 100 bombers. They did not get 50. They got 21 aircraft. 21. You do not have to be a defense contractor to understand that ratio. The cost concentration is almost offensive to the logical mind. It turns the aircraft into something beyond a weapon. It becomes a flying national treasury. But the $44 billion was just the entry fee. The real financial bleeding? That started the moment the wheels left the tarmac. Take that $44 billion. Divide it by 21 airframes. What does the calculator say? It gives you an average unit cost of roughly $13 billion per aircraft. That is in modern 2025 equivalent money. $2 billion. That is the entire gross domestic product of a small island nation condensed into a single piece of flying metal. But a defense budget is a living, breathing thing. The purchase price is merely the down payment. The true villain in this story is not the initial acquisition. It is the accountant's spreadsheet. Because a B-2 Spirit does not just sit in a museum. It has to fly. And every single time a pilot pushes the throttle forward, a financial timer starts ticking. Think about the logistics required to move this machine. You have to burn thousands of gallons of jet fuel. You have to pay a highly classified crew. You have to mobilize a global supply chain just to support a single takeoff. So, what does it cost to keep this ghost in the air for just 60 minutes? Between $130,000 and $150,000 per hour. Let that sink in. The remaining balance on a typical American home mortgage. Completely vaporized. Gone in the time it takes you to watch a single television episode. If the Air Force sends a B-2 on a 24-hour round-trip strike mission from Missouri to the Middle East, that is over $3.5 million in operational burn, just to exist in the sky for a day. It sounds impossible. How can one aircraft bleed cash that aggressively? Because the B-2 is not a traditional airplane. It is a fragile, flying chemical laboratory. And keeping those chemicals intact, that is where the real nightmare begins. If you look at the B-2 Spirit in flight, it looks like alien technology. It has no tail. It has no hard fuselage. It absorbs radar waves like a black hole absorbing starlight. In the sky, it is completely invincible. But war is not just fought in the sky. Aircraft eventually have to land. They have to sit on a tarmac. And this is where the $2 billion ghost reveals a fatal, humiliating weakness: a glass jaw. You see, stealth is not just about the physical shape of the plane. It is about chemistry. The B-2 is coated in a highly classified, radar-absorbent material, a low observable skin. You would expect a nuclear bomber's skin to be tough. You would expect it to withstand the absolute harshest combat environments on the planet. It does not. The B-2's skin is so incredibly fragile that its greatest enemy is not a Russian surface-to-air missile. It is the local weather forecast. The low observable chemical coating and the cockpit canopy are hypersensitive to temperature. They are obsessed with humidity. If a ground crew simply moves the bomber out of its hangar too quickly on a warm afternoon, the sudden thermal swing triggers a catastrophic physical reaction. The stealth skin will literally crack. It will delaminate. It peels away like old paint on a cheap wooden fence. Imagine being the base commander. You are responsible for a $2 billion strategic asset, a weapon designed to bring about the apocalypse. And you are terrified of a humid afternoon in Missouri. Because of this thermal glass jaw, the Air Force cannot just park these jets outside on the runway. They cannot even use standard military hangars. They have to construct custom, near-laboratory-like climate-controlled shelters. Think of it like a massive, concrete incubator. The internal temperature must be absolutely perfect. The air moisture must be rigidly controlled by industrial dehumidifiers. If the air conditioning system fails, the stealth fails. And when the stealth fails, the timeline stops dead. This is not a theoretical vulnerability. It is a documented logistical nightmare. In one specific case, a B-2 was exposed to a sharp temperature-related swing. The coating failed. The jet was not shot down in enemy territory. It did not blow a massive engine on takeoff. It simply experienced a change in the weather. The result: that single temperature-related coating failure grounded the B-2 for weeks. Zero combat capability. Zero global deterrence. Just highly trained technicians standing in a perfectly cooled room, painstakingly trying to piece the ghost back together. You spent $44 billion to build a weapon that can bypass the most lethal air defenses in human history. And you end up with a machine that is held hostage by a thermometer. But the cracking skin is only the beginning of the trap. Wait until you see the math required to actually fix it. Now we get to the part of the story that defense brochures never like to show: maintenance. Not the glamorous kind. Not engines roaring on a runway. Not pilots walking in slow motion. I mean the brutal, fluorescent-lit reality of technicians standing around a stealth bomber, waiting for chemistry to behave. Because once the B-2's skin cracks, or flakes, or starts to separate, you are no longer dealing with a normal aircraft problem. You are dealing with a stealth problem. And stealth problems are expensive in a way that feels almost rude. Here is the number that changes everything. Roughly 39% of the B-2's total maintenance burden comes from its low observable systems. 39%. Think about that for a second. Nearly 4 out of every 10 maintenance hours are not being spent on thrust. Not on landing gear. Not on avionics. They are being spent on one thing only: protecting the illusion that the aircraft is not there. That is the trap. The B-2 does not just need to be airworthy. It needs to be invisible. And those are two completely different standards. A bomber can be mechanically fine. It can fuel up. It can taxi. It can even fly. But if the stealth skin is compromised, the aircraft fails the mission that justifies its entire price tag. So the maintenance crews are not really servicing a bomber. They are preserving a magic trick. And magic tricks are fragile. The radar-absorbent materials need specialized handling. The surface has to be repaired carefully. The coatings need time to cure. The environment has to stay controlled. If temperature shifts too fast, the work can be ruined. If humidity creeps in, the clock starts all over again. That means the real bottleneck is not just money. It is time. A $2 billion aircraft can sit perfectly still while the schedule gets eaten alive by drying times, inspection cycles, and delicate skin work that cannot be rushed without making the whole problem worse. This is where the story stops being an engineering triumph and starts feeling like a corporate thriller, because the enemy is no longer a hostile air defense network. The enemy is downtime. The enemy is labor. The enemy is a maintenance queue that keeps getting longer while the fleet stays tiny. And the watchdogs noticed. A 1997 Go critique basically said the quiet part out loud. The B-2's stealth features were so maintenance-intensive and so fragile that they were actively dragging down operational readiness. That is a devastating sentence. It means the very feature that made the bomber worth buying was also the feature crippling its ability to show up ready. That is the paradox at the center of the whole aircraft. America built a bomber to disappear from enemy radar and then watched it disappear inside its own hangar schedule. And once you see that, the next number feels almost inevitable. Because eventually, somebody had to ask the most dangerous question of all. How many of these things were actually ready to fight? Imagine the red phone rings at Global Strike Command. A crisis has broken out. The United States needs to project ultimate, undeniable power, and they need to do it by tonight. The commanders look at their inventory. On paper, they have a fleet of 21 stealth bombers. But a military does not fight with what it owns. It fights with what is ready. And this is where the spreadsheet finally breaks the ghost. At its baseline, the B-2's basic mission-capable rate hovered around 66%. That means out of 21 bombers, maybe 14 were mechanically sound enough to take off. Not great, but functional. But taking off is not the mission. If a B-2 flies into highly contested enemy airspace without its stealth profile perfectly intact, it is no longer a ghost. It is just a slow, awkward-looking target carrying a nuclear payload. So the government watchdogs applied the only standard that actually matters. They ran the numbers to see how many jets were both airworthy and completely stealth-ready at the exact same time. The readiness rate didn't just dip, it cratered. The mission-capable rate collapsed to 26%. 26%. Let the weight of that failure settle in. That means more than 3/4 of the entire fleet could not simultaneously meet basic flight and full stealth requirements. Do the math on the actual airframes. Out of a $44 billion program, you are left with maybe 5 fully capable bombers on any given Tuesday. 5 airplanes. To cover the entire planet, picture the base commander standing in front of a readiness whiteboard. They are crossing out a $2 billion asset because the hangar got too humid. They are crossing out another one because the chemical skin is still curing. They are holding the most devastating hand in the history of aerial warfare, but they are only allowed to play one card at a time. And the rest of the world? They are doing the exact same math. Moscow is not blind to this logistical collapse. They have watched the B-2 choke on its own maintenance schedule for decades. And they are responding. Russia is actively pushing forward with the PAC-DA program. This is their direct answer. A modern stealth penetration bomber designed specifically to rival the B-2 and its eventual replacement, the B-21 Raider. They know they do not necessarily have to out-engineer American stealth. They just have to build a ghost that can actually survive the tarmac. They are looking at America's 26% readiness rate and realizing they do not need a massive fleet to level the playing field. They just need an aircraft that works when it rains. The invincible bomber has been cornered, not by a missile, but by its own ambition. Look at the B-2 Spirit through the lens of pure economics. You take $44 billion. You pour it into 21 airframes. You achieve the absolute impossible. You create an aircraft that can slip quietly through the most sophisticated radar networks ever designed by human hands. It is an undeniable engineering miracle, but miracles are exhausting. The United States built a weapon of mass deterrence. But deterrence requires presence. And when your $2 billion strategic bomber is locked inside a perfectly air-conditioned concrete box, waiting for its fragile chemical skin to cure like a delicate piece of modern art, it is not deterring anyone. It is just burning cash. Recall the brutal reality of the math. $150,000 an hour just to keep it in the sky. 39% of its grueling ground time dedicated simply to keeping the illusion intact. And the ultimate betrayal? A 26% readiness rate. The military pushed the boundary of stealth technology so far into the future that they accidentally engineered themselves into a corner. They created a glass cannon. It is mathematically invincible in the air, but it is fundamentally humiliated on the tarmac. That is the true legacy of the B-2 program. It is not its combat record. It is not its highly classified radar cross-section. It is the agonizing lesson it taught the Pentagon about the physical limits of extreme technology. The generals learned that you can buy invisibility. You can buy temporary invincibility. But you cannot buy a resilient fleet with pure ambition. When a global crisis breaks out, the enemy does not care how advanced your bomber looks on a contractor's spreadsheet. They only care if it can actually launch. And a superpower that can only deploy 5 fully capable bombers to cover the entire globe is a superpower fighting with one hand tied behind its back. America spent $44 billion to build the ultimate ghost, only to discover that a ghost is completely useless if it is too fragile to leave the graveyard. If you want to see how the Pentagon is desperately trying to fix this exact financial mistake with the new B-21 Raider, hit subscribe and join the briefing.